Daniel Carter picked up every piece of broken glass from the kitchen floor with his bare hands, not because he had to, because his 7-year-old daughter was watching from the doorway barefoot, and he refused to let her get cut. That was the kind of man he was, the kind who bleeds quietly so the people he loves don't have to. But here's what nobody saw coming. The woman who hired him as her caregiver, the one who told him to his face he wouldn't survive 7 days under her roof, would become the very reason he finally stopped bleeding alone. Drop a comment with your city, let me see how far this story is traveling. And if this hits home, subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The morning. Daniel Carter's world collapsed for the second time in 3 years. He was standing in a parking lot outside a Home Depot, wearing a reflective vest that smelled like somebody else's sweat, holding a phone to his ear, listening to his boss tell him the company had restructured. That word, restructured, like it was a business decision and not a man's entire survival being folded up and put in a drawer. We appreciate everything you've contributed, Daniel. Your last check will be direct deposited by Friday. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stood there while the Florida sun hammered down on his shoulders and a group of day laborers walked past him, laughing about something, and the world kept moving like nothing had happened. "Okay," he finally said. "Thank you." He hung up. He stared at the cracked asphalt beneath his work boots. Then he called his daughter's school. "This is Daniel Carter, Maya's dad. I need to make sure she gets on the after-school bus today. I'm going to be a little late picking her up." He wasn't going to be late. He had nowhere to be. But he needed a minute. Just 1 minute where he wasn't Maya's father or a recently laid-off man with 2 months of rent past due. Just 1 minute to be a human being who had just been handed a problem that felt impossibly large. He sat down on the curb. He put his face in his hands. He did not cry. He hadn't cried since the night Keisha packed her things and left, and even then he'd waited until Maya was asleep, run the bathroom faucet so she couldn't hear anything through the wall, and pressed a towel against his mouth. A man like Daniel Carter didn't fall apart in parking lots. But he sat on that curb for 11 minutes. He counted because that's what he did when anxiety started crawling up his chest. He counted things, exits, seconds, reasons to keep going. And when he stood back up, he had a plan. He always had a plan. That was the thing about being a single father. You didn't get to not have a plan. His name was Daniel Jerome Carter. 32 years old. 6 feet, built like a man who'd spent his 20s doing physical work because physical work was all that was available. His hands were calloused in the way that hands get when they've carried more than they were supposed to for longer than anyone noticed. He grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the youngest of 4 kids, raised mostly by his grandmother after his mother decided that the road was calling her name when Daniel was 8 years old. His grandmother, Miss Lorraine, was the kind of woman who could stretch a chicken into 3 meals and still have enough left for Sunday gravy. She taught Daniel that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he had. It was measured by what he did when he had nothing. He married Keisha Washington at 24. They were young and stupid and in love in that reckless, total way you can only be when you haven't been hurt enough yet to know better. Maya was born the following year, and for a while it was good. Not perfect. Never perfect. But good. Then Keisha got restless. That was the word she used. Restless. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she told him one night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. "I feel like I wake up every day and I'm just someone's mother and someone's wife and I don't know who I am anymore." Daniel had listened. He'd listened carefully the way he did, because Daniel Carter was a listener. He'd asked what she needed. He'd suggested counseling. He'd offered to take on more of the childcare so she could take that graphic design class she'd been talking about. But Keisha didn't want solutions. She wanted out, and won. Thursday morning in November, while Maya was at school and Daniel was at his second job. Keisha put her things in 3 suitcases and a cardboard box and drove away in the car they'd bought together. She left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry. I love you both. But I can't keep pretending this is enough for me. Maya deserves a mother who's present, not one who's slowly dying inside. I'll call when I'm settled. Please don't hate me." He didn't hate her. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. It would have been so much easier to hate her. But he understood something about the need to run. He'd felt it himself in the worst moments. The difference was that he had Maya. And Maya had made him decide somewhere deep in his chest that he was going to stand still no matter what the world threw at him. Maya needed at least one parent who stayed. So he stayed. He stayed, and he worked, and he got the apartment, and he got the school figured out, and he found the after-school program, and he learned to braid hair from YouTube videos at 11 o'clock at night, practicing on a doll's head until he could get Maya's twists tight enough that she didn't come home embarrassed. He cooked breakfast before school, even when he'd worked a double. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He went to every school play, every recital, every performance, sitting in folding chairs in elementary school cafeterias, with his big frame folded in half, clapping louder than any other parent in the room. He built a life from the rubble of the one that had fallen down. And then the job disappeared, and he was back on the curb. His friend Marcus was the one who sent him the listing. Marcus Washington, no relation to Keisha. Just a cosmic joke of a coincidence, had been Daniel's best friend since they were 14 years old, and got into the same detention for 2 different reasons on the same Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was the kind of man who fixed problems with information. He sent Daniel links at 2 in the morning. Job listings, apartment listings, scholarship information for Maya's future college fund. He was the human version of a search engine for people in crisis. The text came through while Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table, going through his bills for the 3rd time, as if looking at them harder would make the numbers change. Yo. See, this pay is serious. Live in, so no rent. Read the whole thing before you say no. The listing was for a full-time live-in personal care assistant. The location was a private residence in Coral Gables, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Miami. The compensation was listed as $85,000 annually, fully housed, meals provided, vehicle access. $85,000. Daniel read the number 3 times. His last job had paid him $42,000 a year before taxes, and that had been his best-paying job to date. He scrolled down, seeking a dedicated, emotionally resilient individual to provide full-time personal care assistance for a physically disabled individual. Applicant must have experience with personal care, mobility assistance, and emotional support. Discretion and professionalism are non-negotiable. This position requires you to reside on the premises. Must be available 24 hours with scheduled off time. No prior medical certification required, training provided. Note: several previous applicants have not been suited for this position. We are looking for someone with genuine commitment and a thick skin. The employer has high standards and does not suffer fools. That's an interesting way to word a job listing, Daniel said aloud to nobody. He read it again. Several previous applicants have not been suited for this position. He knew what that meant. It meant the person was difficult. It meant the job had a catch. It meant that the $85,000 came with something that made other people walk away. He thought about his stack of bills. He thought about Maya's face when he'd picked her up from school last Thursday, and she'd asked if they were going to have to move again. Her voice careful and too mature for a 7-year-old, like she already knew the answer and was just giving him the chance to say it differently. He typed back to Marcus, "Send me the contact info." The hiring process was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. First, there was a phone screening with a woman named Claudette, who had an accent that Daniel couldn't quite place, and a voice like she was permanently disappointed by everything. She asked him questions that felt less like an interview and more like an interrogation. "Do you anger easily?" "No, ma'am." "What do you do when someone is verbally abusive toward you?" He paused. "I try to understand what's behind the anger. What if there's nothing behind it? What if someone is just cruel? Then I try to be patient until I find the reason they think they need to be." A long silence. "Why are you applying for this specific position?" "Because I need work, and I'm capable of doing this work well." Most people say something like, "I have a passion for helping people." "Why didn't you say that?" "Because I don't think passion is what this job needs. I think consistency is." Another pause. Longer this time. "Come in on Thursday. The second interview was in person at a lawyer's office in downtown Miami. Daniel wore his best shirt navy blue pressed with care. Maya had pointed out that morning that she couldn't see a single wrinkle. He sat across from Claudette, who was as formidable in person as she'd sounded on the phone, and a man named Gerald, who was clearly an attorney who spent most of the interview looking at a legal pad and occasionally glancing up at Daniel with an expression that managed to be simultaneously professional and skeptical. They told him about the position in more detail. The employer was a woman named Sophia Whitmore, 29 years old, CEO of a technology company she had built herself from a college dorm room. The company Whitespace Technologies had been valued at $1.2 billion 18 months ago before the accident. "What kind of accident?" Daniel asked. Claudette and Gerald exchanged a look. "A car accident," Gerald said. 14 months ago. The injuries resulted in significant damage to her spine. She has limited mobility and requires assistance with daily activities." "What kind of daily activities?" Gerald listed them with the detachment of someone reading off a grocery list. Mobility assistance, personal hygiene, medication management, physical therapy support, meal preparation, household management. Daniel nodded through all of it. "She's been through 6 caregivers in 14 months, Claudette said, watching his face carefully. Daniel kept his expression neutral. "What happened to them?" 2 quit within the first week. 1 lasted 3 weeks. 1 lasted 6 weeks but left in the middle of the night without notice. 1 was terminated for speaking to the press. The most recent lasted 9 days. 9 days, Daniel repeated. She told him he had the emotional depth of a parking cone, and he left his keys on the counter and walked out. Daniel almost laughed. He caught it. "Ms. Whitmore is," Gerald said carefully, "a complex individual. She is extremely intelligent. She has high standards, and she is currently in significant emotional distress as a result of her circumstances. She can be demanding. She can be cutting. She does not offer appreciation freely." "Does she want to get better?" Daniel asked. Both of them looked at him like he'd asked something unexpected. "Physically," he clarified. "Does she want to do the therapy, do the work? Does she want to recover?" "Her doctors believe she has more physical capacity than she currently utilizes," Claudette said, measuring her words. "But motivation has been a challenge." "Okay." Daniel put his hands flat on the table. "I want to be honest with you both. I don't have a medical background. I have a 7-year-old daughter who would need to come with me. I've read that the position allows it, but I want to confirm that's still acceptable before we go further." Gerald looked at Claudette. Claudette looked at Daniel. "Ms. Whitmore has approved the arrangement provided the child does not disrupt the household. Maya doesn't disrupt anything. She's good at being quiet when she needs to be. She's also good at making people smile, which, based on everything you've just told me, might not be the worst thing in the world." The corners of Claudette's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something. "There is a non-disclosure agreement," Gerald said. "Everything about Ms. Whitmore's condition, her business affairs, her personal life, and your employment terms is to remain entirely confidential." "I understand. And I need you to understand, Mr. Carter, that if you take this position and leave abruptly, there are contractual consequences." "I understand." "Do you—" Because several people sat in that chair and said the same thing. Daniel looked at Gerald steadily. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. That's not a thing I do." Gerald studied him for a moment. Then he slid a folder across the table. "The NDA is on top. Employment contract beneath it. Take them home, review them, and if you have no objections, sign and return them by end of business tomorrow." Daniel picked up the folder. "When would I start?" "Monday," Claudette said, "if you sign." It was Thursday. He had the weekend to prepare his daughter for a life they'd never imagined. He told Maya that night after dinner. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread in front of her, working on a math worksheet with the intensity of a child who had decided that school was something to be taken seriously. She got that from him. He'd always believed that the one thing no one could take from you was what you knew. He sat down across from her and waited until she looked up. "What?" she said. She had Keisha's eyes, that sharp reading you quality. "You have your news face on." "I have a news face." "You always do this thing where you sit down carefully like you're placing yourself." She demonstrated exaggeratedly lowering herself into an invisible chair with exaggerated care, and he laughed despite himself. "Okay, we're going to move." Her expression flickered. Just for a second. Then it steadied, because Maya was her father's daughter, and steadying was something she had learned early. "Where?" "A neighborhood called Coral Gables. It's still Miami." "That's far from school." "We'll figure out the school situation. There are good schools there." "Is it because you lost your job?" He didn't flinch. He'd decided early on that he would never lie to Maya about hard things. He would soften them, he would frame them carefully, but he would not lie. That's part of it. But it's also a real opportunity. There's a woman who needs help, and I'm going to help her. And in exchange, we get to live in her house, and I get paid well enough that I can start saving for our future. Our real future. Maya processed this with the serious considering face that she made when she was working through something big. What kind of help does she need? She was in an accident. She needs help with everyday things, getting around, meals. She has people, but she needs someone there consistently. Is she nice? A pause. I think she's going through a hard time. Sometimes when people are going through hard times, they're not easy to be around. Maya considered this. Like Grandma Lorraine was after Grandpa died. He thought about that. His grandmother in the months after his grandfather passed. The sharpness that had come into her voice. The way she'd send food back at restaurants for the first time in her life. The way she'd snapped at his aunts during Sunday dinners. And then gradually, so gradually, you almost didn't see it happening the way she'd come back. "Yeah," he said, "kind of like that." Maya nodded slowly. "Is there going to be space for my stuff?" "All the space in the world." "Is there going to be a yard?" "A big one." "Can I bring my plants?" He smiled. She had 4 succulents on the windowsill that she'd named collectively the Avengers. "Yes, the Avengers can come." She nodded once, decisive, like she'd just signed a treaty. "Okay, but I want to visit Marcus's mom on Sundays still. We'll make it work." "Promise." He reached across the table and covered her small hand with his large one. "I promise." She turned back to her math worksheet. He sat there for another moment, watching her work, thinking about what was coming. Thinking about a woman in a mansion in Coral Gables who had driven away 6 people in 14 months, thinking about what it would feel like to walk into that world with nothing but himself, and the conviction that he could withstand whatever came at him. He thought about Miss Lorraine saying a man's worth isn't measured by what he has. It's measured by what he does when he has nothing. He picked up the employment contract. He found a pen. He signed. The house was not a house. That was the first thing Daniel understood when the address led him down a palm-lined driveway and deposited him in front of something that should have had a historical marker on it. It was a white Mediterranean-style estate with a circular driveway, a fountain that was currently off, and enough square footage that Daniel did a quick mental calculation and concluded that his childhood home could fit inside the front wing. He sat in his car for a moment. Maya was in the back seat looking through the window with wide eyes. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Appears to be." "Like, do people actually live here?" "One person, apparently." "That's a lot of house for one person." "It is," he agreed. He got out of the car. The door to the main entrance opened before he reached it, and Claudette appeared more formidable in the context of the house, somehow wearing all black, looking like someone whose job was to manage impossible situations, and who had stopped being surprised by any of them years ago. "Mr. Carter, on time. That's a good start." She looked past him at Maya, who had climbed out of the car and was standing with her small backpack over both shoulders, looking at the fountain. "She's smaller than I expected." "She hears everything," Daniel said. "Just so you know." Maya turned and waved at Claudette with the easy confidence of a child who has never been intimidated by adults. Claudette blinked. "Follow me. I'll show you both to your rooms first, and then I'll take you through the house protocols." Miss Whitmore. She paused. Is resting. She has been informed of your arrival. They followed her into the house. Daniel noticed Maya touching the wall lightly as she walked, like she was testing whether it was real. He understood the impulse. The interior was everything. The exterior promised. High ceilings, marble floors, rooms that opened into other rooms. It was also, Daniel noticed, deeply quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. The kind that settled into a place when the person living inside it had stopped filling it with sound. His and Maya's rooms were in the east wing, 2 bedrooms with a shared bathroom and a small sitting area between them that Claudette told him he could use as a study or Maya's play space. The rooms were nicer than anywhere he'd ever lived. Maya set her backpack down on the bed and bounced once, testing the mattress, and looked at him with an expression he recognized as contained excitement. She was trying to be cool about it, which was very funny given that she was 7. It's okay, she said extremely casually. Extremely okay, he agreed. Claudette gave him the house tour with the efficiency of someone who had given it many times. The kitchen, the medical supply room adjacent to the master suite, the physical therapy equipment room that had been installed on the ground floor, the schedule medication, times the contact numbers for the doctor, the physical therapist who came 3 times per week, the housekeeper who came twice per week, but worked entirely in the parts of the house Sophia didn't inhabit. Ms. Whitmore's routines, Claudette said, walking him through a printed document that was 2 pages long. She prefers silence before 10 in the morning. She takes her first medication at 7 with food. You'll need to have something prepared by 6:45. She has PT at 9 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. She reads in the evenings. She does not watch television. She does not like the television on in common areas. Daniel was taking notes. Questions. Does she communicate any preferences about how she wants to be helped? Like, does she want you to ask before helping, or does she prefer you to just, Mr. Carter? Claudette looked at him directly. In my experience, the best way to learn Ms. Whitmore's preferences is to be in the room with Ms. Whitmore. There is no version of this orientation that fully prepares you for the actual experience. That's honest. I find honesty saves time. He nodded. When do I meet her? Claudette looked at her watch. Now I imagine. The door to the main sitting room on the ground floor was open, and Daniel stopped in the doorway because the woman inside had her back to him and was working at an architectural-looking desk covered in papers and 2 open laptops, and she was so clearly in the middle of something that interrupting felt wrong. She hadn't heard him, or if she had, she was ignoring him. He waited. He was good at waiting. After approximately 30 seconds without turning around, she said, Either come in or stop hovering in my doorway. It's unnerving. Her voice was nothing like he'd expected. He'd constructed a version of Sophia Whitmore in his head over the weekend. Formidable, yes, but brittle. Something that had once been powerful and was now diminished by circumstance, like a building that had lost its top floors. But the voice that came out of her was like a blade. Sharp, precise, unhurried. The voice of someone who was still entirely accustomed to being listened to. He walked in. She turned the wheelchair with the practiced ease of someone who had accepted its mechanics, if not its existence. And Daniel Carter got his first real look at Sophia Whitmore. She was strikingly beautiful in the way that some people are beautiful without seeming to try good bones. Dark skin that caught the afternoon light coming through the windows, natural hair pulled back and held with a pen she'd apparently stuck in it without noticing. She wore a silk top and the kind of slacks that were clearly expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. She looked, Daniel thought, like someone who had been a CEO. Not in a performed way. In the way that some people carry their history in their posture. She also looked exhausted. And angry. And like she was very used to hiding both behind a face that gave nothing away. She looked at him the way people look at a piece of furniture they're considering returning. You're Daniel Carter. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I'm 29. Sorry. What should I call you? Sophia. She said it like it should have been obvious. And you're what, 30 or 32? She studied him. You look like you've been doing physical work your whole life. Most of it. Good. The last one tried to help me into my chair like I was made of glass and managed to knock my shoulder into the armrest hard enough to bruise. So at least there's that. She turned back to her laptops. Claudette told you the schedule, yes. Did she tell you the rules? She gave me a document. The document covers protocols. I'm talking about rules. She still wasn't looking at him. Rule 1. Don't treat me like I'm dying. I'm not dying. I'm inconvenienced. There's a significant difference that the last 6 people who stood where you're standing failed to grasp. He said nothing. Rule 2. Don't pity me. I can tell when someone is pitying me within approximately 45 seconds of meeting them. It is the single most useless emotion in the human catalog, and I won't have it in my house. Okay. Rule 3. Your child. Maya. She paused at the interruption. Your child Maya is allowed in the house on the conditions that she treats this space with respect and doesn't disturb me when I'm working, which is most of the time. I've agreed to having her here, but I want to be clear that I am not interested in being anyone's maternal figure. I have no interest in children. She doesn't need a maternal figure. She has a father. Something in her expression shifted. Infinitesimally. But he caught it. Good. She looked at her screen. You start tonight. There's a medication I take at 9 o'clock. Claudette will show you the schedule. Do you have questions? He thought for a moment. Yeah. 1. She looked at him. What would make today easier for you? She stared at him for a moment, as if the question was in a language she was still translating. Silence, she finally said. Okay, he said. I can do silence. He turned to go. Mr. Carter. He stopped. I don't know why Gerald approved you. You don't have any formal training. You have a child. And you're looking at me the way people look at something they think they can fix. He turned back slowly. For the record, I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to help. Same thing. No, he said. It's not. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to her screen. You won't last a week, she said. Nobody does. He looked at her profile. The tense set of her jaw. The way her hands rested on the armrests of the chair like she was bracing for something. He recognized that. He knew what it looked like when someone was bracing for the thing they'd been bracing for so long that they'd almost stopped noticing they were doing it. We'll see, he said quietly. And he left the room. He walked back to the east wing. Maya was sitting on the floor of the little sitting room between their bedrooms, the 4 succulents lined up on the windowsill doing her homework with the focused patience that was one of the things he loved most about her. She looked up. How was she? He considered the question. Complicated, he said. Maya nodded seriously like this was useful information she was filing away. Like Grandma Lorraine. A little. Okay. She turned back to her homework. We can handle that. Daniel looked at his daughter's 7-year-old plants on the windowsill, homework on the floor, unshakable, and thought, yeah, we can. He went to learn the kitchen. The work had begun. The woman who told him he wouldn't last a week didn't know one thing about Daniel Carter. She didn't know that he had already survived the worst thing a man can survive, not poverty, not hardship, not public failure, but the moment when the person you built your life around looked at everything you were and decided it wasn't enough. He had survived that. He had gotten up the next morning, braided his daughter's hair, packed her lunch, and gone to work. What Sophia Whitmore was throwing at him was sharp. But it was nothing he hadn't already learned to walk through. What neither of them understood yet was that they were about to learn something from each other, that no job listing, no legal contract, and no carefully worded set of rules had prepared them for. Some walls don't come down because someone tears them down. They come down because someone patient enough is standing on the other side when the person inside finally gets tired of holding them up. The first week was a war. Not the loud kind. Not the kind with raised voices and slammed doors and dramatic declarations. It was the quiet, grinding kind of war, the kind that happens in small moments, in the space between a request and a response, in the half-second pause, before someone decides how much damage they're willing to do. Sophia Whitmore was very good at that kind of war. Daniel learned this on the first morning. He had the breakfast ready at 6:43, 2 minutes early. Oatmeal with sliced banana and a side of the specific brand of green tea that was listed on Claudette's document steeped for exactly 4 minutes because the document specified that too. He'd set the small dining table adjacent to the kitchen, not the formal dining room, which Claudette had told him Sophia hadn't used in months, with a cloth napkin and the medication in its labeled container beside the glass of water. He heard the soft electric hum of the chair before she appeared in the doorway. She stopped. She looked at the table. She looked at him. "I eat at the desk." He kept his expression neutral. Claudette's notes said the dining table. Claudette's notes are 3 months old. "I eat at the desk." He picked up the tray without a word, walked it to the sitting room, and set it on the corner of the desk that wasn't covered in papers and laptops. She watched him do it. He stepped back. She looked at the oatmeal, then at him, then at the oatmeal again. "I don't eat banana." "It's not in the notes." "No, it wouldn't be, because it should be self-evident that I don't eat banana. The texture is objectionable." He reached forward, picked up the banana slices with a spoon, and placed them on the side plate. "I'll update my notes," he said. She said nothing. She picked up the spoon. He turned to leave. "The tea is too weak." He turned back. She had taken one sip and set the cup down with the finality of a verdict being delivered. "How long did you steep it?" 4 minutes. The document. "The document is wrong. 5 minutes. And the water temperature should be just below boiling, not at boiling. Boiling water burns the leaves and makes the flavor bitter." He stood there for a moment. "I'll remember that." "Will you?" She picked up the spoon again. "Or will you be gone by Thursday, and someone else will have to learn it?" He looked at her directly. 5 minutes, below boiling. Got it. He walked back to the kitchen. He stood at the counter for a moment with both hands flat on the surface, not in frustration, just grounding himself, feeling the cool marble against his palms. He breathed. Then he started washing the pan. That was day 1. Day 2, she rejected his lunch because he'd used the wrong cutting board for the vegetables. The red one was for meat, apparently, and the green one was for produce, and he'd used the red one, and she'd looked at the plate like it contained something offensive. "I'm not eating off a board that's touched meat. I cleaned it. The principle stands." He made the lunch again. He did not sigh. He did not make a face. He did not communicate in any way that she could detect that this was anything other than a reasonable request that he was happy to accommodate. She watched him remake it from across the kitchen, and something in her eyes moved, not softening exactly, more like recalibrating. Like she'd expected a reaction and was quietly noting that she hadn't gotten one. He set the new plate in front of her. She ate it. She did not say thank you. I hadn't expected her to. Day 3, she told him that his footsteps were too loud in the hallway outside her room in the morning. "You walk like you're carrying something heavy." "I'll walk differently." "Most people don't know how to walk differently." "I'll figure it out." She watched him with that measuring look she had, the one that seemed to be running a continuous calculation in the background, adding and subtracting, arriving at some assessment she kept to herself. Day 4, she asked him to move a box of files from her office to the storage room on the 2nd floor, and when he came back, she told him he'd taken too long. "It's a heavy box, and I needed to figure out the layout of the storage room." "You've been here 4 days. You should know the layout of the storage room." "You're right, I should. I'll do a full walkthrough of the storage this afternoon so I have it mapped." She looked at him. "You're very difficult to rattle," she said. He realized then that she'd been trying to. That every small objection, every criticism, every impossible standard had been not malicious exactly, more like a test. Like she was throwing things at him to find the edge, to locate the point at which he became another person who got frustrated and quiet and then disappeared. He didn't say that. Instead he said, "You want me to bring those files back up, or is where I put them fine?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "Where you put them is fine," she said, and she turned back to her screen. Day 5 brought something different. The physical therapist was a woman named Rosa, who arrived at 9 in the morning with professional cheerfulness and a bag full of resistance bands and portable equipment. She was clearly used to Sophia. She walked in with the ease of familiarity and didn't take any of the coldness personally. Daniel had been told his role during PT was to be available if needed, but not to hover. I was making lunch prep in the kitchen when he heard it. Not words at first. Just the quality of the silence, changing the way the air in a room changes temperature when something emotional happens. And then Sophia's voice controlled, but with something underneath it that wasn't quite controlled. I said stop. Rosa's voice calm and steady. Sophia, you did this last week too. If we don't push past, I said stop. Harder this time. The edges sharp enough to cut. I'm not doing the standing transfers today. I told you at the start of the session. The goal we set. I don't care about the goal we set. I care about what I'm telling you right now, which is that I'm not doing it. A pause. Then Rosa's voice quieter. Okay. We'll work on upper body today. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something that hadn't been resolved. Daniel kept his eyes on the cutting board. An hour later, Rosa packed up her equipment and stopped in the kitchen doorway on her way out. She looked at Daniel with the expression of someone who wanted to say something and was deciding how much of it to say. She was doing better, Rosa said quietly. 2 weeks ago, she was making real progress. Something happened and she pulled back. Do you know what? She doesn't tell me things like that. She's not that kind of patient. He nodded. She responded to encouragement. Rosa made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She responds to honesty. She hates being handled. If you tell her she's doing great when she's not, she shuts down completely. Good to know. Rosa looked at him with something like cautious assessment. You're the longest-lasting one so far, you know. By this point, the others were either already gone or had called Claudette at least twice to complain. I haven't had anything to complain about. She looked at him carefully. Then she left. That afternoon, Sophia was quieter than she'd been all week. Not the strategic quiet she deployed when she was watching him to find fault. A different kind. The kind that comes after something costs you. She worked at her desk, but he noticed she wasn't moving between the laptops the way she usually did, pulling data and cross-referencing things with the focused urgency of someone who could not stop being a CEO even when she was no longer technically running anything. She was just sitting, staring at a document that she clearly wasn't reading. He brought her afternoon medication and a glass of water and set them on the corner of the desk without a word. She didn't look up. I was about to leave when she said without any particular inflection, "What's wrong with stopping?" He paused. For PT. He turned. Nothing's wrong with stopping. Rosa thinks there is. Rosa's job is to push you. That's what she's supposed to think. Sophia still didn't look up from the document she wasn't reading. My doctor said I have significant recovery potential. He said it in October, in November, in January, and again last month. He says it every time like it's news, like I haven't heard it 12 times. A pause. Do you know what significant recovery potential actually means? Tell me. It means maybe. It means probably not as much as you're hoping. It means we can point to a possibility and feel good about having pointed to it. Her voice was flat, factual, stripped of anything that could be called feeling. I did the standing transfers for 3 weeks. I worked at it. Every day I worked at it. And then I had a bad night, and the next morning I couldn't do what I'd done the day before, and my doctor said, that's normal, recovery isn't linear. Which is true. I know it's true, but it felt like... She stopped. He waited. It felt like something I'd built falling down, she said. And I'd built things before. I know how to build things, but I don't know if I can keep building something that keeps falling. The room was quiet. He thought for a moment before he spoke. My daughter had a hard time learning to read, he said. She'd get a word right, and then the next day, she couldn't get it at all. She'd look at letters she'd recognized yesterday, like she'd never seen them before. And she'd get so angry, this 7-year-old, just furious at a page of paper, because she knew she'd had it. She knew she'd done it. And it felt like someone had taken it back. Sophia finally looked up. What did you do? I told her the truth. I told her that some things don't build in a straight line, that sometimes your brain is learning even when it looks like it's forgetting, And I told her that the one thing that actually stops the progress is stopping. A beat of silence. She reads fine now, he said. Sophia looked at him, not with the measuring calculation she usually had running, with something less defended. I'm not a 7-year-old learning to read, she said. No, your situation is significantly more difficult. He picked up the empty water glass from the morning that he'd been meaning to take to the kitchen. I'm just saying the principle holds. He left the room. He didn't know if it landed. He didn't know if it made anything better or worse. He'd learned over years of being a father that you couldn't control whether a thing you said reached someone. You could only control whether it was true. That night, for the first time, Sophia didn't send him out of the room immediately after delivering her evening medication. She was reading an actual physical book, which surprised him because everything he'd observed about her suggested she processed the world through screens, and she looked up when he set the glass of water on the side table. Your daughter, she said. What's she like? He thought about how to answer. She's smarter than me, he said. She's been smarter than me since she was about 4. She just doesn't know it yet. Something shifted in Sophia's face. Not a smile, not quite, but the possibility of one. Does she know why you took this job? She knows I needed work. She knows we needed a stable situation. She knows I told her the truth about all of it. You tell her the truth about everything. I try to. She considered that. My parents didn't do that, she said. Not with bitterness, just as a fact. He didn't push, he just waited. They were the kind of people who believed children should be sheltered from difficulty, which sounds kind, but what it actually did was make me completely unprepared for the first time something hard happened. She turned a page she probably hadn't read. The accident was the first genuinely hard thing in my adult life. I'd had setbacks, failures, but nothing I couldn't outwork. And then something happened that I cannot outwork, and I don't know what to do with that. He stood there. He thought about the night in the bathroom after Keisha left, the faucet running, the towel against his mouth. You don't outwork it, he said. You just keep showing up, and eventually the showing up starts to look like something. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her book. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night. He was at the door when she said it. Daniel. He stopped. Yes. 5 minutes, below boiling. You got it right this morning. He let himself smile, facing the door so she couldn't see it. Thanks for noticing, he said. And he walked out. The first week ended. He was still there. He wasn't counting anymore. The second week arrived with a change he hadn't expected, and it came not from Sophia, but from Maya. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Maya had come to the kitchen before school. She'd started doing this, slipping out of the East Wing in her uniform to sit at the kitchen island while he made breakfast, doing her homework, or drawing in her sketchbook while he worked, keeping him company in the particular comfortable way that Maya kept people company, which was by being entirely absorbed in her own world, while also clearly enjoying the shared space. He hadn't told her to stay out of the main house. He'd told her to be aware of Sophia's space and not to be disruptive. But Maya was constitutionally incapable of being disruptive, in the same way she was constitutionally incapable of being still. She was always doing something, always creating, always quietly involved in a project of her own, which meant her presence was felt but never loud. On this Wednesday, Sophia had come to the kitchen earlier than usual, which was unusual because she almost always had him bring things to the desk, and she'd stopped in the doorway when she saw Maya sitting at the island. Maya looked up. Sophia looked at Maya. Daniel had his back to both of them, monitoring the tea, waiting to see which way this went. Hi, Maya said. Hello, Sophia said, very carefully. I'm Maya. I know. My dad talks about you. Sophia glanced at Daniel's back. Does he? He says you're complicated. A beat of silence. He told me that about someone else once. Maya continued turning a page in her sketchbook. And they turned out okay. Sophia said nothing for a moment. What are you drawing? A map of the house. I'm still figuring out all the rooms. Another pause. The room off the south hall, the one with the closed door, is a library, in case you want to add it. Maya looked up with the pure, bright interest of a child who has just learned something excellent. "There's a library." "There is." "Can I see it?" The silence stretched. Daniel kept his eyes on the tea. He felt the weight of it. "Maybe," Sophia said. "After school." He turned around, then casual as he could manage, and found Sophia looking at Maya's sketchbook map with an expression that she was clearly trying to make neutral and not quite succeeding at. "Tea's ready," he said. She looked at him. He handed her the mug without another word. She took it. She did not go back to the desk. She sat at the far end of the kitchen island, and Maya continued her map, and Daniel cooked breakfast, and the three of them existed in the same space, in a silence that was for the first time something close to comfortable. He didn't say anything about it. Sometimes you don't name the things that are working because naming them can break them. That afternoon he was doing laundry in the utility room when he heard Maya's voice from somewhere in the south corridor, and then Sophia's voice, and then Maya's laugh, that bright, uncomplicated laugh that had always been one of his favorite sounds on earth. He stood still for a moment. He listened. He went back to the laundry. He was smiling. The third week was when the business world tried to intrude. It started with a phone call that he wasn't meant to hear, but the house was large and sound traveled in unexpected ways, and he was passing the sitting room when he heard Sophia's voice go from the cool, managed tone she usually used to something with actual heat in it. "I am still on the board, Marcus. That hasn't changed." He kept walking. But later that afternoon, she was sitting by the large window in the sitting room, and her posture was different from her usual working posture. The focused forward lean, the hands moving between devices. She was sitting back. Still. Looking out the window at the garden that nobody had been tending. He brought the afternoon medication. She took it without looking away from the window. He was about to leave. "Do you know what a golden parachute clause is?" she said. He sat down in the chair across from her, which he hadn't done before. He'd always stood, always kept himself in the spatial position of an employee. But something in her voice said, this wasn't a moment for that. "It's a contract provision," he said. "Protects executives if they're removed from a company." She glanced at him. "Finance." "I read, and I've been listening to your calls." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite an accusation. Not quite amusement. "My board is moving to reduce my voting shares," she said. "They're packaging it as a restructuring, a strategic realignment. They've been doing it slowly for the past 8 months. Small adjustments, reasonable on their face. But the cumulative effect is that by next quarter, I'll have minority control of the company I built." She paused. "Started in a dorm room, with $73 and a laptop I bought at a pawn shop. Do you know how long it took me to build it to what it was? No. 6 years. 6 years of working 18-hour days and eating whatever was cheapest and sleeping 4 hours a night and reading contracts in parking lots before meetings because I couldn't afford an attorney to read them for me." Her voice was steady, precise. "And now I'm sitting in a window watching a garden grow over, while men who came in after the hard part was done rearrange the pieces." He was quiet. "Can you fight it?" "I have grounds. My attorney says I have grounds." She turned back to the window. "But fighting it requires energy, requires presence, requires me to walk into a boardroom and stand." She stopped. The word just hung there. She hadn't said stand, but that was where the sentence had been going. He didn't fill the silence. After a moment she said, "They know I won't push back. That's the calculation they've made. They think because I'm here, I'm gone." He leaned forward. "Are they right?" She looked at him directly. "No," she said. The word came out like something recovering its shape. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Okay. Then what's the first step?" She looked at him like he'd said something unexpected. "The first step," she repeated. "Toward fighting it. What's the first move?" She was quiet. He could see something happening behind her eyes, the CEO brain coming back online after idling, pulling threads, running through sequences. "Getting the shareholder records," she said slowly. "Reviewing every modification to the charter over the last 14 months and building a documented timeline." "Do you have access to those records from here?" "Technically, yes. but the data is on a server I haven't logged into in—" She stopped. "A long time. Do you want me to pull a chair up to that desk so there's more workspace?" She looked at him. "That's not your job. My job is to help you. What would help you right now?" The words sat between them. She stared at him for a long moment with the expression of someone trying to find the angle, the calculation, the thing underneath the surface that made a gesture make sense. "Pull up the chair," she said finally. He pulled up the chair. He went to the kitchen to start dinner and left her to it. When he came back 2 hours later to tell her the food was ready, she was deeply into 3 open browser windows and a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting. And she didn't look up, and she said very distantly, 20 minutes. I went back to the kitchen and kept the food warm. 20 minutes became 40. When she finally came to the kitchen table this time, not the desk, which was the first time she'd eaten at an actual table since he arrived. She sat down and looked at the food, and then at him with something he hadn't seen on her face yet. "I'm going to need a printer," she said. "The one in the office is out of toner. I'll order toner tonight. And I need to schedule a call with my attorney for tomorrow morning. I'll make sure you're not disturbed." She picked up her fork. "Eat," he said, "before it gets cold." She ate. They sat in silence, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of 2 people who had stopped being strangers. I didn't notice exactly when it happened. That was the thing about it. It wasn't one moment, not one exchange or one look or one sentence that changed things. It was accumulative. It was the weight of small things adding up until the structure they built was something neither of them had intended to build. It was the morning he came in and found her already awake, sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of tea. She'd somehow managed to make herself, and rather than feeling unnecessary, he'd felt something closer to relief, because it meant she'd had a good morning, a capable morning, and he understood by then that her good days mattered to him. It was the afternoon. Maya came home from school and stopped outside the library door, knocked carefully and said, "Ms. Sophia, I finished the map." And Sophia had looked at the sketchbook map of the house that Maya had completed, every room labeled, every corridor, drawn tiny illustrations of furniture in each space, and she'd looked at it for so long and so quietly that Maya had started to look worried. And then Sophia said very quietly, "The library's wrong. The dimensions are off." And Maya said, "Will you show me?" And Sophia said, "Get a pencil." And they'd sat in the library for an hour and a half with Maya redrawing the room, while Sophia talked to her about architectural proportion, and Maya had absorbed every word with the focused delight of a child encountering a new idea. It was the night he'd stayed up late reviewing his finances at the kitchen table. Old habit couldn't shake it. The anxiety that came with any period of actual stability. The compulsive need to verify that it was real, and Sophia had come out of her room because she couldn't sleep, and found him there, and sat down across from him, without an invitation, and said, "What are you doing?" And he'd said, "Old habit." And she'd said, "Anxiety accounting." And he'd said, "What?" And she'd said, "That's what I call it. When you review numbers, not because they've changed, but because you need to touch them to make sure they're real." And he'd stared at her, and she'd said with the absolute matter-of-factness that was her version of intimacy, "I did it every night for the first 2 years of building the company. It's not irrational. It's a trauma response to financial instability." And then she'd gotten up and said goodnight, and gone back to her room. And he'd sat there for a while with the strange feeling of having been understood by someone who wasn't supposed to understand him. It was the day her physical therapist Rosa showed up, and Sophia was waiting. Not with resistance, but with the tense resolve of someone who had decided to try again. He'd watched from the hallway when Rosa gave him a small look that asked him silently if something had happened. He'd given the smallest shrug in return. He didn't know what had made her decide. He just knew that she had. She fell that morning. He heard it. The small crash. Rosa's quick movement, the silence that followed. He came in. Sophia was on the floor, caught by Rosa's arms before she'd gone all the way down. Her jaw was set in the particular way he'd come to recognize as her refusing to show pain. Her hands gripped Rosa's forearms. "I've got you," Rosa said. "You're okay. You're okay." Sophia looked at Daniel. and he saw it, the thing she kept behind all the sharpness and the strategy and the calculated coldness. For one unguarded second, it was just there, fully visible. She was terrified, not of the fall, not of the floor, of the moment he would flinch, of the moment his face would change to something that looked like pity or discomfort, or the particular expression of a person who was reconsidering whether they were equipped to be in this room. He looked back at her. His face didn't change. "I'll get the mat," he said quietly, "so we have more surface next time." And he turned and went to the equipment room and came back with the padded workout mat and laid it behind where she was working, and Rosa looked at him with something that was close to gratitude, and Sophia's hands slowly released their grip on Rosa's arms. "Let's try again," she said. And they did. Later, when Rosa had gone, and Sophia was back at the desk, and the afternoon had settled into its particular rhythm, she looked at him when he brought the tea. "You didn't flinch," she said. "Nothing to flinch at." "Everyone flinches." "I don't." She held the mug with both hands. "Why not?" He thought about how to say this. "Because I know the difference between someone being weak and someone being in the middle of something hard. You're in the middle of something hard. That doesn't make you anything other than what you are." She looked at him. "And what am I?" He met her gaze. "Someone who's still fighting, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're on the floor." He set down the secondary glass of water. "That's not something I'd flinch at." The room was very quiet. Sophia looked down at the mug in her hands. "My fiancé," she said so quietly he almost missed it, flinched the first time, and then the second time, and by the third time, he wasn't in the room anymore. He didn't say anything. He didn't leave all at once. He just got a little further away each time until one day I realized that the distance between us had become a different kind of life. And then he made the honest choice and made it official. She set the mug down. At least he was honest about it eventually. He thought of Keisha's note, the careful handwriting, the apology she'd folded into the act of leaving. "People get scared," he said. "You don't." "I've got my own scars, just different ones." She looked at him with the evaluating look that had initially felt like a weapon, but that he'd come to understand was simply how she related to things she was trying to trust. "What are they?" she asked. "Your scars." He thought about whether to answer, and then he told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He told her about Keisha leaving, about the note on the table, about picking up Maya from school that evening and making dinner like nothing had changed, so his daughter wouldn't see him unravel. About the nights after when the apartment had a specific quality of silence that felt different from the comfortable silence of a sleeping house, a silence that felt like subtraction. Sophia listened. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't offer advice. She just listened with the full attention of a person who had learned that listening was one of the few things money couldn't buy. When he finished, she said, "She left and you stayed." "I had Maya." "You would have stayed anyway." He considered that. "Probably," he said. She nodded slowly. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've spent my whole adult life making myself the kind of person that people stay for. Building the company, the success, the image. Making myself worth staying for." A pause. "And it turned out that was the wrong strategy." "Yeah," he said. "You can't build yourself into someone people don't leave. People leave for their own reasons." Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be true. The corner of her mouth moved. That almost smile that had been showing up more often. "You're very honest," she said. "You said the first day that you can't stand to be handled." "I did." "Then honesty seemed like the right approach." She looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel." "Yeah." "You've been here 3 weeks." He nodded. "I told you that you wouldn't last a week." "You did." She looked down at the papers on her desk. "I'm not going to apologize for that. I didn't ask you to. But I want you to know." She stopped, started again. "I want you to know that it matters, that you're still here. It matters to me." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. And somehow that was enough. For both of them. He walked back to the kitchen, thinking about walls, about how some people build them to keep things out, and about how sometimes a wall built to keep things out is really just a door that's waiting for someone patient enough to find the handle. He had found it, not by force, not by being extraordinary, just by showing up, day after day after day, until the showing up became the thing itself. 4 weeks in the house had started to feel different. Not in any way Daniel could point to specifically. Nothing had been rearranged. The routines were the same: the medication, the meals, the PT 3 times a week, the long working hours Sophia kept at the desk that was perpetually covered in legal pads and open laptops. The structure of the days was unchanged, but the air inside the house had shifted. The way air shifts when a window gets cracked open after a long winter. The same rooms, the same walls, but something moving through them now that wasn't moving before. Maya felt it first. Maya always felt things first. She had started spending part of her afternoons in the library, doing homework at the low reading table while Sophia worked at her desk in the adjacent sitting room. They didn't talk much during these sessions. Sophia worked. Maya read or drew. But occasionally, Maya would appear in the doorway with a question. A math problem. She was stuck on a word she didn't recognize, and Sophia would answer without looking up from her own work, in the efficient, precise way she did everything, and Maya would nod seriously and go back to her table. It was not warmth exactly, not yet, but it was something. Daniel noticed that Sophia's evenings had changed too. She was reading more. Not just the legal documents and financial analyses that had covered her desk in the early weeks. Those were still there, but actual books. He would bring the evening medication and find a novel open on her lap spine, carefully maintained, even though she'd clearly been reading it for weeks. He didn't comment on it, but he noticed. He also noticed that she had started talking to him differently. Not softening exactly, Sophia Whitmore was constitutionally incapable of being soft, and he suspected she would be that way until the day she died, and he found he didn't mind it at all. But the edge in her voice when she spoke to him had changed its quality. It was still precise, still direct, but it had stopped being aimed. That was the word he landed on alone in the kitchen one night while the house was quiet. Aimed. For the first weeks, everything she said had been aimed, like she was positioning a weapon measuring distance. Now she just talked to him. Clean and direct without the calculation underneath. He understood what that meant. He just wasn't ready to name it yet. The 4th week was also when the outside world arrived, and it arrived in the form of a man named Philip Holt. Daniel was in the utility room when he heard the front door. Claudette had let someone in, which was unusual because Sophia didn't receive visitors. He came into the hallway and saw a man in his mid-50s silver-haired expensive suit, with the particular ease of someone who had been walking into important rooms his entire life and had never once been turned away. He looked at Daniel with an expression that was politely blank, in the way that conceals an assessment already made. "You must be the new caregiver," Philip said. "Daniel Carter." He didn't extend his hand first. He waited. Philip extended his after a beat that was almost too small to notice. "Philip Holt. I'm on the board of Whitespace Technologies. I've known Sophia for years." He looked past Daniel toward the sitting room. "Is she available?" "I'll let her know you're here." He walked to the sitting room. Sophia was at her desk working. She'd been on the phone with her attorney 3 times that week, and the legal pads had multiplied. "Philip Holt is at the door." She went very still. Then she set her pen down carefully, the way she set things down when she needed a moment to compose. "Send him in." He sent Philip in. Then he went back to the utility room, because that was his job, and because Sophia had not asked him to stay, and because he understood that there were rooms he was not meant to be in. He heard the conversation in pieces, not intentionally. The house carried sound. Philip's voice smooth, practiced the voice of a man who had learned to make hard things sound reasonable. He spoke about the company, about the board's concerns, about the difficult decisions that had to be made in difficult times. He used words like stability and confidence, and the long term with the frequency of a man who had learned that those words made other words harder to argue with. Sophia's voice, very controlled, very careful. He could hear the effort in it, the way she was managing the temperature of every word, keeping it professional, keeping it contained. Then Philip said something Daniel couldn't fully hear, and Sophia's voice lost the careful management and became something colder and more honest. "Don't do that. Don't come into my house and tell me what's best for my company, while I can see exactly what you're doing with the shareholder structure." A pause. Philip's voice still smooth. "Sophia, you've been through an enormous amount. Nobody expects you to be at full capacity. Get out. Clean. Absolute. No performance in it." Philip left. He passed Daniel in the hallway on the way out. He looked at Daniel with the evaluating look again, less polite this time, the assessment closer to the surface. "You should know," Philip said quietly, "that this situation is complicated. People in Sophia's life right now, people who have access to her, are under scrutiny. It's not personal." Daniel looked at him. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" Philip's expression did something subtle. "I'm informing you." "I heard you," Daniel said. "Have a good afternoon." He went to the kitchen and started dinner. 20 minutes later, Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway. She didn't say anything at first. She looked at the counter at the food he was preparing, at the ordinary domestic evidence of the life that had built itself inside her house over the past month. "What did he say to you in the hall?" "He said the situation was complicated and that people with access to you are under scrutiny." Her jaw tightened. "He doesn't have the authority to..." "Sophia." He kept his voice even. "I know what he was doing. I'm not worried about it." "You should be. He's going to look into you. He's going to look into your finances, your background, your reasons for being here." "Let him." She stared at him. "You're not concerned. I have nothing to hide. I'm a man who needed work and got it. My reasons are exactly what they look like." He turned to put something in the oven. If his investigation finds something more interesting than that, he's a better detective than I'd give him credit for. The silence behind him had a particular quality. "He thinks you're here for my money," she said. He turned around. He looked at her directly. "Are you asking me that? Or are you telling me what he thinks?" A long pause. "Telling you what he thinks," she said. "Okay," he said, and turned back to the stove. She stayed in his doorway. "Daniel." "Yeah. I don't think that." He didn't turn around, but something in his chest did something complicated. "Good," he said. "Because it would be a terrible investment strategy. I'm not that financially sophisticated." She made a sound, brief, surprised out of her. Actual laughter quickly contained but real. He smiled at the wall above the stove. Neither of them mentioned it. The night it all broke open came without warning, the way the things that have been building for a long time tend to do suddenly in a moment that doesn't look like the important one until afterward. It was a Tuesday past midnight. Daniel had been asleep for 2 hours. Maya had been asleep since 9. The house was in its deep nighttime quiet. He came awake to a sound he couldn't immediately identify. Not a crash, not a voice, just a sound at the edge of hearing. That was wrong in the specific way that sounds are wrong when you are responsible for someone and your sleeping brain is always partly listening. He sat up. He waited. It came again. A sharp, involuntary sound quickly cut off, like someone had started to cry out and stopped it halfway. He was out of bed and into the hallway before he'd made a conscious decision to move. The sound was coming from Sophia's room. He knocked, firmly but not hard. Nothing. He knocked again. "Sophia." A sound on the other side of the door. Movement. Then her voice strained and stripped of everything she usually armored it with, "I'm fine." He put his hand on the door. "I'm coming in," he said, not asking. He opened the door. The room was dim. She'd knocked the bedside lamp over at some point. It was on its side, still lit, casting everything at a disorienting angle. She was half sitting, half lying at the edge of the bed, her body angled in a way that looked wrong, one hand gripping the headboard. He crossed the room in 4 steps. "What happened? Tell me what's happening." "Muscle spasms." Her voice was controlled, but breathless. "My back. They started 20 minutes ago. I couldn't..." She stopped, drew breath. "I couldn't reach the phone." He could see it on the floor a foot away from the bed. It must have fallen. Okay, I've got you. Where's the worst of it? Lower back, left side. Her teeth were pressed together. It passes. It always passes. I just needed... She stopped again as another spasm hit. Her hand tightened on the headboard, knuckles sharp. He moved to the medical supply cabinet that was built into the alcove of her room, found the muscle relaxant her doctor had prescribed for episodes, confirmed the label. He brought it back with the water glass from the nightstand. This is the one Rosa showed me, he said, for spasms. She looked at it, nodded. She took it. Her hands were not steady. He set the water glass on the nightstand, and then he did something that he did not overthink, because overthinking it would have been unkind. He sat down on the edge of the bed beside her, and he put one hand on her back very gently in the area of the spasm, and he applied the slow, steady pressure that he'd read about in the physical therapy materials that Rosa had left him in the first week. She went rigid for a moment. He kept the pressure even and steady and didn't move. Slowly, by degrees, she stopped fighting the contact. The next spasm was slightly less than the one before it. The one after that, slightly less again. They sat there for a long time. He didn't talk. He just maintained the pressure steady as breathing and waited while her body gradually stopped waging war against itself. After a while, he didn't know how long time moved strangely in the dark, her breathing changed. The short, controlled breaths she'd been using to manage the pain lengthened into something less managed and more real. Better? He asked quietly. Yes. Barely a whisper. He started to move his hand. Don't. Very quiet. Not yet. He stilled. They sat in the low-angled light from the fallen lamp. I hate this, she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. I hate needing. She stopped. I hate that this is my life now. He said nothing. He let the space stay open. Before the accident, she said, I ran 12 miles a week. I stood in front of 200 people in boardrooms and didn't flinch. I flew to 3 different countries in 1 week because the work required it. A pause. And now I can't reach a phone on the floor. He felt the weight of what she was carrying, and he did not try to lighten it because he had learned that the most useless thing you can do for someone in real pain is tell them the weight is manageable. That must be so hard, he said. Just that. Just the plain truth of it, without a comma and a but following it. She was quiet for a long time. Why are you still here? She finally asked. Honest answer, not the job answer. He thought about that. Because I know what it looks like when someone is waiting to be left, he said. And I know what it does to a person, the waiting. A pause. My daughter did it after her mother left. She'd look at me sometimes in this way, just checking, making sure I was still there. I'd be in the kitchen, and I'd look up, and she'd be in the doorway just looking. And then she'd go back to what she was doing. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just verifying. He kept the pressure on her back steady. You do the same thing. You just do it with harder eyes. The room was very quiet. I do, she said. You do. I didn't know that. Most people don't know they're doing it. She was silent for a while. He felt the muscles under his hand continue their slow release. I drove them away, she said. The other caregivers. I know I did. I know I was doing it. A pause. It's easier to make someone leave than to watch them leave on their own. At least if you push them out, it's on your terms. I know, he said. You're not easy to push. I've been pushed before. I know what it is. She turned her head slightly enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. Your wife. Ex-wife. And yeah. And before that, other things. He thought about his mother, the road she said was calling her name. He didn't say that part. I know what it is when someone's doing what they think they need to do to survive. Doesn't make it not hurt, but I understand the mechanism. And you still stay. I still stay. She turned her face forward again. The spasms had subsided. He could feel it in the muscles under his hand. They had released from the braced, seized quality into something closer to ordinary tiredness. I was engaged, she said without preface. His name was Ethan. We were together for 4 years. He was there the night of the accident. He rode in the ambulance. She said all of this in the same tone, flat factual, as if she were recounting something that had happened to someone else. He stayed for the first month. He was very good at staying for the first month. He brought flowers. He talked to the doctors. He said all the right things. Daniel waited. And then somewhere in the second month he started looking at me differently. Not unkind. Ethan was never unkind. That was almost the worst part. He was unfailingly kind. He just looked at me like I was a problem he was trying to figure out how to live with. She paused. And I could see him doing the math. I could see him calculating what his life would look like. He never said it out loud. He was too good a person to say it out loud. But I could see it. What did you do? I made it easy for him. I started being difficult, picked fights, told him he should go, told him I didn't need him, which was half true. I gave him every reason to feel like leaving was the reasonable choice. A pause. And then he left. And it felt like confirmation of something I'd believed my whole life. What was that? That the version of me that people love is the one who doesn't need anything. Her voice was very steady. He understood by now that the steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of enormous discipline. The capable one. The one with the answers. The one running the meeting. The moment I needed something, actually needed something, the math changed. He thought about that for a long time. Keisha said she was disappearing, he said finally. She said she couldn't figure out who she was anymore. And I listened to that, and I tried to help, and I meant every bit of it. But somewhere underneath, I think I was so scared of her leaving that I was holding on too tight, trying to be so steady that she couldn't justify going. He paused. Sometimes the person staying too hard is just a different version of the same problem. Sophia turned to look at him. Fully this time. He met her eyes. Neither of us, he said, got left because we weren't enough. We got left because the people who left had things they needed to do that didn't have anything to do with us. She looked at him for a long time. That's either very wise or a very functional delusion, she said. Could be both. Something in her face, the long-held tension around her eyes, shifted. Not released completely, but shifted like a fist slowly opening. I haven't talked about Ethan to anyone, she said. I know. How do you know? Because you don't talk about things that still have teeth. You only talk about things you've processed. He kept his voice even. You haven't processed that one yet. She stared at him. You're very perceptive for a man whose last job was a reflective vest. He laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out genuine and warm and surprised, and she looked at him with an expression that was fully unguarded for one complete second. Not the CEO, not the difficult client, not the woman behind the wall. Just a person in a dim room, watching another person laugh, and finding that it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. That she was in the presence of someone real. He gathered himself. The lamp, he said. Let me fix the lamp. He righted the bedside lamp, adjusted the shade. The room resettled into a warmer version of itself. Can you sleep? He asked. I don't know. Do you want me to? He stopped, reconsidered. I'll be in the hall. The door will be open. If you, she said. I went to the hallway. He sat in the chair that was outside her door. He'd pulled it there weeks ago for the nights she was restless. Though he hadn't told her that, and he sat there in the dark with his back against the wall. He could hear her in the room. The small sounds of a person settling. The creak of the bed adjusting. Then quiet. He sat there for a long time. I wasn't sure at what point he registered that the quality of the silence from her room had changed from wakeful to sleeping. It was a thing he'd learned to read as a father, the sound of a house when someone in it has finally gone under. He sat there a while longer anyway. Then he went back to his room. He lay in the dark. He thought about what she'd said. Why are you still here? And the honest answer he hadn't quite given. Not fully. Because the honest answer was more than what he'd said, more than the explanation about waiting to be left and recognizing the pattern. The honest answer was that somewhere in the past 4 weeks between the tea temperature and the sketchbook map and the midnight kitchen conversation and the sound of her real laugh, brief and surprised and contained, Somewhere in all of it, he had stopped thinking of this as a job. He hadn't named that yet. He wasn't sure he was ready to. But it was there. And the next morning, when he brought the breakfast to the desk, oatmeal, no banana tea, steeped for 5 minutes, at just below boiling. Sophia looked up when he set it down, and she said simply without ceremony, "Thank you, for last night." He nodded. "Any time," he said, and meant it in a way that was larger than the word. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. But she was sitting differently, lighter, like something she'd been holding for a very long time had been set down somewhere she trusted it would still be there in the morning. He went back to the kitchen. He was aware with a clarity that felt both new and like something he'd known for a while that the ground beneath everything had shifted, and that there was no going back to what it had been before. He wasn't sure he would have gone back even if he could. The days that followed were quieter and also fuller quieter, because the particular brittle tension that had filled the house in the first weeks had dissipated, and fuller, because the space left by that tension was now occupied by something actual. By the end of the 5th week, something else had changed too. Something that Daniel only recognized in retrospect, the way you recognize a gradual shift in weather, only when you look up one day and realize the season has turned. Sophia had started fighting back. Not against him. Against Philip Holt and the board of directors and the slow, careful restructuring that had been bleeding her company away from her while she sat in a mansion in Coral Gables and stared at a garden that nobody was tending. She was on calls constantly now. Her attorney Robert called every morning. She had a video conference with 2 of her remaining loyal shareholders on a Thursday afternoon that Daniel wasn't present for, but he could hear through the wall the shift in her voice when she was in full CEO mode. Not the careful management she used with him, not the stripped-down honesty of their nights, but something entirely different. A third register, precise and authoritative and utterly without doubt. He stood outside the closed door for a moment and listened to it, and he felt something that took him a second to identify. He was proud of her. Maya noticed too. Maya noticed everything. "She sounds different on the phone," Maya said at dinner one evening, the 2 of them eating in the kitchen, while Sophia finished a call in the other room. "Different how?" "Like a different person. Like a person who's really sure of things." "She is sure of things," he said. "She's very good at what she does." Maya considered this, dragging a piece of bread through sauce in the contemplative way she had. "I think she's scared though," Maya said. He looked at his daughter. "Why do you think that?" "Because when she's on the calls, she talks really fast and she doesn't leave any quiet spaces. People talk fast and loud when they're scared, to cover up the scared part." Maya set down the bread. "You taught me that." He looked at his daughter, this 7-year-old, who had been quietly paying attention to everything her whole life, and he thought about the fact that the most important things he'd ever taught her hadn't been lessons. They'd been observations she'd made by watching how he moved through the world. "You're pretty smart," he said. "I know," she said simply. From the other room, Sophia's voice was firm and precise and pushing forward. And she was, he knew, very scared. And he knew with the same certainty he'd felt the night he sat in the chair outside her door that she was going to do it anyway. That was who she was. And that was, he admitted to himself sitting in his kitchen while his daughter ate her dinner, the thing that had quietly and completely undone him. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning. Daniel saw it first, because he was always awake before anyone else in the house, and he had a habit of scanning his phone while the tea steeped. Not news, usually just messages from Marcus, sometimes school notifications for Maya. But Marcus had sent a link at 6:47 in the morning with no text attached, which was its own kind of message because Marcus always had text. He clicked it. The headline was from a Miami business gossip site that positioned itself somewhere between legitimate journalism and weaponized rumor. The kind of publication that had enough credibility to be taken seriously and enough recklessness to print things that careful outlets wouldn't touch. Whitespace CEO's mystery caregiver, who is Daniel Carter, and what does he want? He read it standing at the kitchen counter while the tea went past 5 minutes. The article was careful in the way that damaging things are careful when written by people who understand defamation law. It didn't say he was after Sophia's money directly. It said that sources close to the Whitespace board had expressed concern about the level of influence a recently hired caregiver had over the company's founder during a period of significant corporate vulnerability. It noted that Daniel Carter had no medical training, no formal caregiving credentials, and had been hired despite a history of financial instability. It described him as a divorced single father who had lost his job shortly before applying for the position. It included a photograph taken from him outside the property, through the gate, catching him loading groceries from the car that managed to look in the particular cropping chosen like a man with something to hide. It quoted anonymously, someone described as a person familiar with Ms. Whitmore's inner circle. There are real questions about whether this individual has Sophia's best interests at heart, or whether he is positioning himself to benefit from her current vulnerability. He set his phone face down on the counter. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned off the burner under the tea because the water had been sitting too long and it would be bitter, and he started it again fresh. He heard Sophia's chair in the hallway before he heard her voice. She came through the kitchen doorway, and she had her phone in her hand, and her face was doing something complicated, a compression of anger and something underneath the anger that he recognized as guilt. "You've seen it," he said. "Robert called me at 6:15. She set the phone on the counter face down the same way he had. "I'm going to find out who talked." "Sophia, this is Philip. This has Philip's fingerprints all over it. The framing, the timing were 2 weeks from the shareholder meeting, and this appears now. This is not coincidence." Her voice had the precise, clipped quality of controlled fury. "I'm going to call Robert right now, and we're going to—" "Sophia," firmly, enough to stop her. "Sit down." She looked at him. "Please," he added. She sat. Not because he'd asked, he suspected, but because something in his face told her that what came next required stillness. He poured 2 mugs of tea. He set one in front of her. He sat across the kitchen island. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. "Not what you're going to do to protect me. What you actually want to do." She looked at the mug. "Fight it," she said. "Okay. What does that look like? Public statement. My attorney puts out something clean and direct that addresses the implication without dignifying the specific claims. And then we accelerate the shareholder timeline if they were hoping this would distract me from the meeting prep they miscalculated." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "What I don't want is for this to become a story about you instead of about the board's behavior. That's what they want. They want me chasing this so I'm not watching what they're doing with the charter amendments." He looked at her. "You've already thought through all of this." "I've been awake since 6:15. "Did you sleep before that?" She met his eyes. "Some." He nodded. "The article doesn't bother me," he said. "I want you to know that. My record is clean. My finances are a mess, but they're an honest mess. Anyone who looks at my actual life will find a man who needed work and took it." "It bothers me," she said. "I know. It bothers me because it's being used as a weapon against something that is—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. She started again. "It's being used to make something that is private and real look like a transaction, and that makes me—" She stopped again. He waited. "Angry," she said finally. But the word was smaller than the thing she actually meant, and they both knew it. He looked at her across the island. "Sophia, what did you say to Robert when he called at 6:15? A pause. "I told him the article was defamatory and strategically timed, and that we needed to respond before market open." "And what did you want to say?" She looked at him for a long moment. "That it's nobody's business," she said quietly. "What happens inside this house? What we are to each other. It's nobody's business, and I resent that the world thinks it has the right to have an opinion about it." The kitchen was very quiet. He held her gaze. "Then let's make sure the only story they can tell is the one that's actually true," he said. "Which is that you're a founder defending her company from a board that's been systematically weakening her position for over a year. That's the story." She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softening. That was not the right word for anything. Sophia Whitmore did, but opening. The way a hand opens when it's been holding something so tightly for so long that the decision to release it is almost physical. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. She picked up her phone. She called Robert. He listened to her talk for 40 minutes, and in that 40 minutes, she dismantled the article, the timing, the board's likely strategy, and 3 separate legal avenues for response with the clinical efficiency of someone who had built something from nothing and knew exactly how people tried to take things apart. When she hung up, she sat for a moment, and then she looked at him across the kitchen island, where he'd been quietly eating his breakfast and reading, and she said, "You didn't leave." He looked up. "From the kitchen. From the house. Last night you knew the article was coming. Claudette must have sent you the heads up when Robert called her before she called me. You had hours." He'd gotten the message from Claudette at 11:30 the night before. "I know," he said. "And you stayed." "I know." She looked at him. "Why?" she asked. And it was the same question she'd asked on the night of the spasms in the dim room with the fallen lamp. "Why are you still here?" But it meant something different now. It was larger now. It had more at stake. He set down his coffee. "Because leaving would have been the easy thing," he said. "And I'm not interested in easy." She held his gaze for a long time. Then she nodded once, and stood and went to her desk, and the day began. The shareholder meeting was in 11 days. Those 11 days moved differently from any other time in the house. The rhythms that had established themselves, the meals, the medication, the PT, the quiet evenings were still there, but they were compressed now, tightened around the work that Sophia was doing at the center of everything. She worked 18 hours some days. He tracked her medication times more carefully than usual because she forgot on the long days, and forgetting mattered. He brought food to the desk without being asked, because asking became a friction she didn't need. He ran interference when Claudette called with questions that could wait, and he escalated the ones that couldn't. And he developed over those 11 days an understanding of Sophia's work rhythms that was so specific, it had become almost instinctive when the long silences meant deep focus and shouldn't be interrupted, when the short restless silences meant she was stuck and a question from him might help her unstick. Maya watched all of it with the attentiveness she brought to everything. On the 8th day, she appeared in the doorway of the sitting room where Sophia was on a call and held up a piece of paper. Sophia glanced at it, kept talking, glanced again, and then the call faltered for half a second, because on the paper Maya had written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "You're going to win. I know it." Sophia looked at the paper. She looked at Maya. She turned back to her call. But something in her posture changed, straightened, like a thing that had been bracing against the wind had found unexpectedly that someone was bracing against it with her. That night, after Maya was asleep, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, instead of going back to the desk. This had become a habit over the past weeks, not every night, but often enough that it had the quality of a ritual. The work done or set aside, or simply put down for the hours that belonged to something else. Daniel made tea. He sat across from her. 3 more days, he said. 3 more days. She turned the mug. "Robert thinks we have the votes. 2 of the shareholders Philip thought he'd secured have come back. Evidently being publicly named as architects of a hostile restructuring of a disabled founder's company is not the kind of press people want." Imagine that. The corner of her mouth moved. "The article," she said. "About you." "What about it?" 2 of the shareholders mentioned it specifically. They said it read as a pressure tactic. "It actually helped us." She paused. "I find that both satisfying and enraging." "Why enraging?" "Because it means they wrote something about you, something invasive and unfair, and aimed at making you look like a predator, and the useful outcome was ours. You didn't get justice. We just got leverage." He looked at her. "Sophia, I don't need justice from a gossip website. I know, but I do, on your behalf." He was quiet for a moment. "That might be the nicest thing you've said to me," he told her. She looked faintly embarrassed, which on Sophia Whitmore looked like a specific tightening around the eyes and a slight turn of the head. "Don't make it strange," she said. "I'm not making it strange. You have a look on your face." "What kind of look?" the kind that precedes something sincere. He laughed. She looked at him when he laughed. She always looked at him when he laughed, he had noticed, with an expression that moved through several things very quickly. Surprise, something warmer than the containment. Like she was allowing herself a certain amount of it and no more. "Daniel," she said. The way she said his name had changed over the weeks. He'd noticed it, but hadn't examined it. He examined it now briefly, in the second before she spoke, the way it had started as a summons and become something else. Something that had a different weight, a different temperature. "There are things I don't know how to say," she said. "Things I'm not practiced at." She looked at the mug. "I've been a particular version of myself for a very long time. The one who doesn't need. The one who has the answers. The one who keeps the door closed because it's safer." He was very still. "You've been inside this house for 6 weeks, she said. "And I'm not the same as I was before you came in. And I don't know what to do with that exactly, but I don't want to not say it." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said quietly. "Do you?" "Yeah, I'm not the same either." She held his gaze. "What are we doing?" she asked. Not with fear. With the precision she brought to things, she was trying to understand accurately. "I don't know," he said. "But I think we're doing it anyway." She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd walked into her house, Sophia Whitmore didn't measure the thing in front of her for risk. She didn't calculate. She didn't run the variables. She just sat with it, in the quiet kitchen, with her tea going cold. And for the first time in a very long time, not being sure felt like something other than danger. The shareholder meeting was held on a Thursday via video conference, because Sophia had insisted on remote format and had the contractual standing to require it. Daniel set up the conference room she hadn't used in over a year, cleared the table, tested the connection, got the camera positioned correctly so she was in frame the way she wanted, level and direct. He stood in the doorway while she settled herself. She was wearing the kind of clothes she hadn't worn since before the accident, put together. Precise, the silk blouse and the blazer that made her look exactly like what she was, a founder and a CEO, and a woman who had built something from nothing and was not finished with it. She looked up. "How do I look?" she asked. He considered her. "Like someone they should have thought twice about crossing," he said. She straightened slightly. "Good," she said. "Close the door." He closed the door. He went to the kitchen. He sat at the island, and he waited, and he listened to the quality of sound from the conference room. Not the words. He couldn't hear words, just the rhythms, the pacing of voices through a wall. He could hear when Sophia spoke. He could identify her voice's register even at this distance. She spoke a lot. Good. An hour and 20 minutes later, the door opened. She came out. She crossed the hall. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her face, and he knew before she said anything. "It held," she said. "The votes held." She said it like she was testing the sentence, making sure it was real. Philip's amendments failed. The charter remains as written. And 2 of his primary allies on the board submitted their resignations this morning, apparently preferring to exit gracefully rather than be associated with what Robert is already calling the attempted restructuring. He stood up. She looked at him across the kitchen. And then something happened on her face that he hadn't seen before. Not the almost smile, not the brief surprised laugh, not the unguarded second in the dim bedroom. Something fuller than all of those. Something that had been waiting behind everything else for long enough that it arrived without warning, the way things do when they've been held back past their time. Her eyes filled. She didn't let them spill. She blinked once hard, and they didn't. But he saw it. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and he put his arms around her, and she was stiff for exactly 1 second. 1 second of the old reflex, the wall going up, and then she wasn't. She leaned into him. He held her. She didn't cry. He'd half expected her to. She had earned it, God knew, but she didn't. She just held on, her hands gripping his arms, her forehead against his shoulder, and breathed. Like someone who had been running on emergency reserves for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to simply stop. He held her, and he didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already contain. After a while she straightened. She pulled back enough to look at him. She was composed again. Almost entirely. Only the grip of her hands on his forearms gave anything away, and even that was loosening. "I need to call Robert," she said. "I know. And then I need to call my CFO, and then there's a statement that needs to go out before market close." "Sophia." She stopped. "I know," he said. "Go make your calls." She looked at him, and then deliberately, and without any of her usual management of the moment, she reached up and put her hand against his face. Just for a second. Then she dropped it. She went to make her calls. He stood in the kitchen. He put his hand against the side of his face, where her hand had been briefly automatically the way you touch a thing to confirm it was real. It had been real. He put the kettle on. Marcus called that evening because Marcus always knew things before he should. "Yo, I saw the press release. Whitespace restructuring blocked 2 board members out. That's your person. That's my person. How you doing?" "I'm good." A pause. "Danny?" Marcus's voice had shifted into the register he used when he was being serious, which was different from his usual voice in a way that people who didn't know him well might miss. "Talk to me. What's actually happening?" Daniel looked out the kitchen window at the garden, the one nobody had been tending though. Sophia had mentioned twice in the last week that she wanted to do something about it. "Something I didn't plan," he said. "Something good." He thought about the hand against his face. "Yeah," he said. "Something good. And the complications. Significant. You scared?" He thought about that honestly. "Yeah," he said. "Some. Of her. Of wanting something this much." He paused. "Last time I wanted something this much, I got a note on the kitchen table." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She gonna leave you a note on the kitchen table?" I thought about Sophia Whitmore. He thought about the woman who had spent years making herself impossible to love from a distance, because closeness had always eventually been used against her. He thought about the midnight kitchen and the fallen lamp, and the way she'd said his name that morning over tea, the weight in it, the temperature. "No," he said. "Then what are you scared of?" He thought about it. "I'm scared that I'm right about her," he said finally. "That's the thing. It's not the usual fear. I'm scared that every good thing I think I see is actually there, because if it is, then I have to let myself believe in it, and I haven't done that in a while." Marcus was quiet. "Man," he said finally, "you need to let yourself believe in it." Daniel exhaled. "Yeah," he said. "You think she—" "Yeah," he said. "I do." Another pause. "So what are you going to do?" He looked at the garden again. "I think I'm going to start with the garden," he said. Marcus made a sound that was half confusion and half knowing acceptance, because that was how Daniel Carter operated, and Marcus had known it for 18 years. "Okay," Marcus said. "Okay, call me." "I'll call you." He hung up. He stood there in the kitchen for a while. Then he went to find Sophia. She was in the sitting room calls. Done. The legal pads pushed to the side, sitting with a stillness that was different from her working stillness. No urgency underneath it. Just rest. Real rest possibly for the first time in as long as he'd known her. She looked up when he came in. "The garden," he said. She blinked. "I want to fix the garden. I know it's not in the job description, but I'd like to do it if you'll let me." She looked at him for a moment. "Why the garden?" "Because things grow better when someone tends them." He held her gaze. "And I think you've been looking at it through that window for long enough." She was very still. He watched her run the calculation, the old one, the one that measured everything for risk and distance. He watched her run it, and then he watched her stop. "There's a shed," she said. "Around the south side. There should be tools." "I'll find them." She nodded. He turned to go. "Daniel." He stopped. "I want to help," she said. "With the garden." A pause. "When I'm able. I don't want to just watch through the window." He looked at her. "When you're ready," he said. "I'll tell you when I'm ready." "Okay." She looked at him with the full, undefended look that she'd been giving him more freely in the past weeks. And underneath it, visible now in a way it hadn't been that first day, was what the sharpness had always been protecting. Not coldness, not indifference. Someone who had been hurt enough to stop letting things matter. Letting things matter again. Again, he understood, was the bravest thing she was doing. Braver than the shareholder meeting. Braver than the PT sessions. Braver than all of it. He went to find the shed. Behind him, he heard the sound of her chair moving toward the window. He smiled. He kept walking. That night, Maya came to find him in the kitchen while he was reviewing the week's schedule. She climbed onto the stool across from him and put her chin in her hands and looked at him with the expression she used when she'd been thinking about something for a while. "Are we staying?" she asked. He looked at his daughter. He thought about the garden and the library and the map in the sketchbook and the hand against his face. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I think we're staying." Maya nodded, satisfied, like a conclusion she'd already arrived at had been confirmed. "Good," she said, "because I told Ms. Sophia I'd help her with the garden on weekends. She said she knows about plants." She slid off the stool. "I didn't tell her about the Avengers yet. I'm waiting for the right moment." She went to bed. He sat there. He thought about 6 weeks ago, a parking lot and a reflective vest and a stack of bills and a number that looked like a miracle with a catch. I thought about what Miss Lorraine used to say, a man's worth isn't measured by what he has. It's measured by what he does when he has nothing. He thought about what he'd done. He'd showed up, day after day, until the showing up became something else. Until the something else had a name that sat quietly in his chest, warm and certain and patient, waiting for its moment. He closed the schedule. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. In the morning there would be tea, 5 minutes, below boiling, and a garden that was finally going to be tended. The garden came back slowly. That was the thing about living things that had been neglected, they didn't recover all at once. They came back in stages, in small, stubborn signs of life, pushing through what had been given up on. A new shoot here. A branch that had looked dead, but wasn't. Color returning to leaves that had gone pale from lack of attention. Daniel started work on it the Saturday after the shareholder meeting. He found the shed around the south side of the house, exactly where Sophia had told him it would be, and inside it were tools that were good quality and barely used. Still sharp handles, still clean. The kind of tools bought by someone who had intentions for a garden and then ran out of time before the accident took even that possibility away. He worked through the morning. He didn't ask for help. He didn't announce what he was doing. He just did it the way he'd always done the things that needed doing, quietly, methodically, without making the work into a statement. At 10 o'clock he heard the door from the south entrance open. He looked up. Sophia had come outside. She was in the chair, but she'd put on a light jacket against the morning air, and she was looking at what he'd cleared a quarter of the overgrown bed. The old growth pulled back. The soil turned with an expression he recognized as the one she used when she was assessing something and finding it different from what she'd expected. "You started with the south bed," she said. "Gets the most morning sun." She moved closer, looked at the soil. "The drainage is wrong on this side," she said. "It's why the previous plantings didn't hold. The ground slopes the wrong way, and the water pools against the roots." He looked at her. "You know about drainage?" "I grew up in a house with a garden. My grandmother." She stopped. A pause that had something personal in it briefly visible, then set aside. "I know more about gardens than you'd expect. Tell me what to do about the drainage." She looked at him. "Get a flat spade from the shed, and about 20 pounds of horticultural grit from whatever garden center is nearest. I'll tell you where to add it." He got the flat spade. They worked for 2 hours that morning, her directing and him doing, and at some point the directing became a conversation, and the conversation became something that moved between the work and other things. Her grandmother's garden in Georgia. The way she'd learned to identify plants by touch before she learned their names. The summer she was 9 and had grown tomatoes from seed and considered it one of the significant achievements of her life to that point. More significant than the company, he asked. She considered this genuinely. "The tomatoes were entirely mine," she said. "No investors, no board, no advisors. Just me and the dirt and whether I paid attention." He smiled at the soil. "I understand that. I know you do." Maya appeared at 11 still in her pajamas with her hair in the loose morning braids she'd started wearing since he'd perfected them. And she looked at the garden and at Sophia and at the progress made and said with complete 7-year-old authority, "I want to plant something." "What do you want to plant?" Sophia asked her. "Something that comes back every year, so we can watch it come back." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Perennials," she said. "We'll get perennials." Maya nodded, like this was the obvious correct answer, and went back inside for breakfast. And Daniel caught Sophia's expression in the moment, after the brief, unguarded look of someone who had just heard the word we used in a way that didn't feel like a threat. He didn't say anything about it. He went back to turning the soil, but he filed it away. "We'll get perennials. Not you should get perennials. Not there are perennials that would work. We." The shift in her language had been happening gradually over the weeks. The way her language shifted in everything, when the careful management fell away, and the real thing showed up underneath. He noticed it in the evenings, especially the natural way they'd started talking about the future in shared terms, neither of them examining it, just doing it the way people do when they've quietly agreed on something without having used any official words. The weeks that followed the shareholder meeting had a different quality from everything before. The crisis had passed. The external pressure had subsided. What remained was the life inside the house, the actual texture of the days, stripped of emergency. And what Daniel discovered in those quieter weeks was that he liked the life inside the house. He liked it in the ordinary, unromantic way that matters more than the dramatic kind. He liked the sound of the house in the morning. He liked knowing the routines so well that he could navigate them without thinking. He liked the way Maya had started spending her after-school hours at the library table with a running commentary of her school day directed at whoever was within earshot, which increasingly was Sophia, who listened with what Maya reported to her father as a very good listening face. He liked the way Sophia asked him real questions now, not testing ones, not questions with an agenda underneath them. Just things she wanted to know about his childhood, about Savannah, about his grandmother, Lorraine, about the years after Keisha left and how he'd rebuilt. He liked who he was inside this house. That was the thing he hadn't expected. He'd come in prepared to endure, to be steady and present and useful in the way he'd always been steady and present and useful. The deep-running competence that had been his primary offering to the world since he was old enough to understand that the world required things of him. He hadn't come in expecting to feel like himself, more than himself maybe. Like a version of himself that the last several years had pressed down the grief and the financial stress and the specific loneliness of being a single parent who was performing steadiness for a child who needed it, had slowly started to straighten back up. Sophia did that. Not by doing anything, just by seeing him, by asking the real questions, by being herself so uninterested in performance that his own fell away naturally. I thought about this on a Wednesday evening while making dinner, and he thought about it so completely that he burned the onions, which he hadn't done since he was 19. From the sitting room, without looking up from whatever she was reading, I can smell those from here. I know, I'm handling it. Is this a metaphor for something because I find it concerning? He laughed. Just onions, he said. A pause. Are you sure? Sophia. I'm asking a direct question. He turned down the heat and looked through the doorway at her. She was looking back at him over book, with the expression that had replaced the measuring look lighter, with something playful at its edges, the version of her that had been in there all along behind the 16 layers of protection. I was thinking about something, he said. About... He looked at her. You, he said simply. She held his gaze. The playfulness shifted into something quieter. The onions, she said finally. Yeah. Start them again, lower heat this time. He turned back to the stove. He was smiling at the wall above the burner. He heard her turn a page. He started the onions again. The conversation they'd been having without having it for weeks finally became a real one on a Thursday night in the 7th week in the kitchen, late after Maya was asleep, and the house was deep in its nighttime quiet. Sophia had come for tea, which was the ritual. Now his tea, her tea, the kitchen table, the hour that belonged to whatever was real. He'd been aware all evening that something was building. Not tension exactly. More like the air pressure before weather. The particular quality of the space between them when she was working toward saying something and hadn't gotten there yet. She wrapped her hands around the mug and looked at the table, and then she looked at him. "I need to say something to you," she said. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond because I won't be able to restart if I lose the thread." He put both hands flat on the table. "Okay," he said. She took a breath. "I have spent my entire adult life being the person who holds everything together. That was my identity, my value. I held the company together, and I held my relationship together, and I held the image together, and when the accident happened and I couldn't hold things together anymore." A pause. "I thought I had nothing. I thought without the holding together I was nothing. And that's what I believed for 14 months, that I was the sum of my usefulness." He was very still. "And then you walked through my door," she said. "And you were the most aggravating person I had ever encountered, because you wouldn't react the way people react. You wouldn't be rattled. You wouldn't be managed. I threw everything at you and you just—" She stopped. "You just kept making the tea correctly and being present and not flinching. And I didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't flinch." She looked at the mug. "You saw me," she said. "Not the CEO, not the disabled woman, not the project or the problem or the liability. Me. And I don't—" Her voice held its precision, but there was something underneath it now that the precision was working harder than usual to contain. "I don't have a lot of experience with that. Being seen. Without it costing something. Without there being a version of it that eventually gets used against me." He kept his hands flat on the table and kept his face quiet and kept the space open. "I love you," she said. "Direct. Clean. No ceremony. I'm not good at this, at saying it. I don't have a lot of practice with the vulnerable version of myself, and I'm aware that right now I am sitting in front of you in a kitchen at midnight, telling you something that could very easily be used to make a fool of me, and I'm doing it anyway. Because you've earned the truth." A pause. "And because I think not saying it would be dishonest. And I've decided that the one thing I won't do with you is be dishonest." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her across the table. At the woman who had told him he wouldn't last a week. At the woman who had tested and measured and pushed and calculated and slowly, reluctantly, one layer at a time, decided that he was something worth opening the door to. He reached across the table and covered both her hands with his. "Sophia." She met his eyes. "I stopped counting the days a long time ago," he said. "Because this stopped being a job a long time ago." He held her gaze. "And I love you. For your precision and your sharpness, and the way you listen and the way you fight, and the fact that you told a 7-year-old about perennials like it was the most natural thing in the world. All of it. I love all of it." She looked at him. Her eyes did the thing they'd done the morning of the shareholder meeting Phil held, did not spill. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll figure it out." "That's not a plan." "No. It's better than a plan." She looked at their hands on the table. Then she turned her hands over and held his. They sat like that for a long time in the quiet kitchen in the house that had been empty for so long and wasn't anymore. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Daniel had never been interested in fairy tales, and Sophia was constitutionally allergic to anything that required pretending. What they built was not perfect. It was real, which was better. There were hard days. Days when Sophia's pain was bad, and her temper was shorter for it, and she said things that were too sharp, and he let them land without returning them, and she came back later with the particular form of apology she'd developed. Not the performed kind, just an acknowledgement, direct and honest. That was about the pain, and not about you, and I'm sorry. There were days when the recovery felt slower than hope, when the PT sessions left her exhausted and frustrated, and certain that the progress she'd made had been an illusion. On those days, he was simply present. He made the tea. He kept the house running. He made her laugh when she least expected it, which was his particular gift, the ability to find the one thing that cracked the heaviness without dismissing it. There were days when his own history caught up with him. The anxiety accounting at the kitchen table, The specific middle-of-the-night fear that something good can only mean something harder coming. On those nights, Sophia would appear the way he'd once appeared for her, and she would sit across from him, and she would say, "Tell me." And he would. And she would listen the way she listened, completely, without rushing to fix, without offering anything but attention. And gradually the fear would lose its teeth. They learned each other. That was the actual process of it. Not a moment, not a revelation, but the long, patient work of learning another person. Her patterns and his. The things that needed space and the things that needed presence. When to talk and when to be quiet, and when to simply put a hand on someone's arm in the dark and let the contact do what words couldn't. Maya moved through all of it with the equanimity of a child who has learned early that stability is not about the absence of difficulty, but about the presence of the right people. She brought the Avengers out to the garden in the spring. She introduced them to Sophia with the same gravity she brought to all significant occasions, explaining each one's name and origin story with the thoroughness of a scientist presenting findings. Sophia listened to every word. Then she said, "Hawkeye is in the wrong pot. The root system needs more depth." Maya stared at her. "How do you know which one is Hawkeye?" "You said he's the overlooked one. This pot's been overlooked. The soil's compacted." She held out her hand. "Give him to me." Maya handed over the succulent. They repotted Hawkeye together. Maya holding the new pot, and Sophia working the soil with the practiced hands of someone who had always known more about growing things than she'd had recent occasion to use. After Maya looked at the result with satisfaction. "He looks better," she said. "He'll do better," Sophia said. "Things grow better when someone pays attention to what they actually need." Maya looked at her. "That's true for people too," Maya said. Sophia looked at the succulent. "Yes," she said. "It is." 3 months after the shareholder meeting, Sophia walked into the boardroom. Not via video conference. Not remote. In person in the building she had built from a dorm room and $73 and a pawn shop laptop, standing at the head of the conference table on her own feet, with the cane she'd been using for 3 weeks, and the absolute complete authority of a person who had never actually left. Daniel was not there. She hadn't asked him to be there, and he hadn't offered because he understood that this was a room she needed to walk into alone. Some things have to be done by the person they belong to. She called him afterward. She didn't say anything for a moment when he picked up. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I walked to the end of the table," she said. "And I stood there. And I looked at every single person in that room. And nobody said a word." He closed his eyes briefly. "Sophia." "I didn't cry," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you didn't." "I thought about it for approximately 2 seconds." "That's allowed." "Then I ran the meeting." A pause. "It was a good meeting." "Of course it was." She was quiet. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "When I was in that room standing at that table, there was a moment where I thought about the night I fell during PT. And the way you walked in and got the mat and said we'll have more surface next time. You didn't make it a thing. You just solved the next problem." A pause. "That's what I thought about. Not the accident. Not the 14 months. You walking in with the mat." He sat with that for a moment. "I'll take it," he said. "You should," she said. "It's significant. I don't think about people during important moments. I think about problems. And I was the solution." "You were the mat," she said. "Which is better?" He laughed. She laughed. It was a real laugh. The completely uncontained kind that she'd gradually stopped treating like something that needed to be managed. The kind that made her sound exactly like who she was. Brilliant and fierce and funnier than anyone expected, and not broken, not diminished, not the sum of what had been taken from her. Just herself. Entirely, finally herself. The charitable foundation was her idea. It came out of a conversation they had one evening in the garden, which had become what it had always been meant to be, a living, tended, seasonal thing, full of the perennials Maya had picked out, and the herbs Sophia had directed, and the specific lavender along the south bed that had been Daniel's own addition, because he'd read it was good for the drainage, and also because the color reminded him of something hopeful. She was talking about the recovery, not hers, specifically, but the structural problem of it. The way that people who became disabled in their productive years faced not just the physical challenge, but the systematic removal of the resources and networks that could help them rebuild. The therapy is expensive, she said. The adaptive equipment is expensive. The modifications to make a space accessible are expensive. And most of the people who need all of that most urgently are the ones who've just lost their income because of the thing that made them need it. He listened. Someone should do something about that, she said. Then she stopped, looked at him. I should do something about that. Yeah, he said. You should. It would require legal restructuring. A separate entity from Whitespace, but connected enough to leverage the network. Robert could structure it. It would need a director. Someone who understands what the actual experience is, not theoretically, but from the inside. He looked at her. Are you asking me something? She met his eyes. I'm asking if you'd run it with me. He looked at the lavender. He thought about the parking lot and the reflective vest. He thought about the bills on the kitchen table. He thought about sitting on that curb for 11 minutes and counting things to keep the anxiety from climbing his chest. He thought about Miss Lorraine. A man's worth isn't measured by what he has. It's measured by what he does when he has nothing. Yeah, he said. I'd run it with you. She nodded. Like she'd known he would say yes. Like she'd known it for a while and had been waiting for the right moment to ask. The foundation launched 8 months after Daniel Carter had walked through Sophia Whitmore's front door wearing his best pressed shirt and his honest record and nothing else. They called it the Standing Foundation, which was Sophia's idea, and which she explained when people asked was about standing in the full sense, standing back up, standing on your own terms, standing inside the life you were supposed to have. The press covered the launch, which meant the press covered them, which meant the article from the gossip site came up in every interview. The one about the mystery caregiver, and the corporate vulnerability, and the photograph cropped to make an honest man look like something he wasn't. In every interview, Sophia addressed it the same way. Directly. Without visible irritation. With the calm authority of someone who has decided that the truth is the only story worth telling. The article characterized Daniel as someone who came into my life for strategic reasons during a vulnerable period. The reality is that he came into my life because he needed work and I needed help. And what happened after that is what happens when two people who've both been through genuine loss decide to stop running from the possibility of something real. A pause. He was the only person who stayed when staying was genuinely difficult. I don't think that requires more explanation than that. In every interview, they also asked about the recovery. How she'd gotten from where she'd been, the mansion, the isolation, the months of pulling back from PT, to where she was now. Standing at a podium. Running a foundation. Walking into boardrooms. She always gave the same answer. Someone paid attention to what I actually needed. Not what he thought I needed. Not what looked like helping from the outside. What I actually needed. She would pause. And then he showed up. Every day. Until showing up became the whole thing. The evening of the foundation launch, after the press and the donors and the colleagues and the well-wishers had all gone home, Daniel found Sophia sitting in the garden. It was late. The air had the particular quality of South Florida evenings in the spring, warm but moving, the jasmine that had gone in along the east wall, filling the dark with something sweet. He sat down beside her. She was looking at the perennials. Maya had chosen the first ones, showing their second season of bloom, which was the thing about perennials, the thing Maya had understood instinctively: they come back. You plant them in hope, and they justify it by returning. Good day, he said. Good day, she agreed. They sat in the quiet. After a while she said, You know what I thought about today, during the launch, during the speeches? What? The first morning, when you came in and you'd made the oatmeal with the banana. He smiled. The texture is objectionable, he said. The texture is objectionable, she confirmed. But you moved them to the side plate without making it a thing, without sighing or rolling your eyes or making me feel. She paused. Like a burden. You just moved them to the side plate. He looked at her profile. "You were never a burden, Sophia." "I know that now." She turned to look at him. "You taught me that." He held her gaze. "I told you," he said, "that you wouldn't last a week living with me." He recognized the callback immediately. The first words she'd ever said to him returned to him now held differently. "You were right," he said. She looked surprised. "I didn't last a week," he said, "because I stopped counting the days." She looked at him for a long moment. The woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had been broken by accident and rebuilt herself by choice, who had driven away every person who had tried to manage her and had found in the one who didn't something she had stopped believing existed, who had said, "You won't last a week," and meant, "Please don't leave," and had spent every day since then learning how to ask for what she needed from the person who had already decided to give it. She reached over and took his hand. He held it. In the garden that had come back because someone tended it. In the house that had been empty and wasn't. In the life that had been assembled from the broken pieces of two separate losses, and turned somehow in the patient accumulation of ordinary days into something neither of them had planned, and both of them had needed. Maya's voice came from inside the house calling for her father, with the unhurried certainty of a child who knows exactly where her people are and trusts they will answer. Daniel squeezed Sophia's hand. "I'll be right back," he said. "I'll be here," she said. And she was. She was there in the morning, and she was there in the evening, and she was there for the hard days and the good ones, and so was he, and so was Maya, and the house that had once held only one person's silence now held the accumulated noise of the family that had chosen each other, not because it was easy, not because they were perfect, not because the world made it simple or straightforward or without cost, but because the only love worth having is the kind that shows up every single day. Until showing up becomes the whole story, and the whole story becomes a life.